Welcome back to this new episode of Romance Scam Rebellion. My name is Enola Johnson, and today we'll be talking to Beth Hyland. She's the author of a book called Diary of a Romance Scam When Swiping Right Turns Wrong. Please join me in welcoming Beth to the program.
Okay, so I live in Portage, Michigan, which is on the west side of the state, and I moved here about 3 years ago. I'm divorced. I got divorced 6 years ago, and that's where I always start when I tell my stories. I got divorced 6 years ago, and it was a good thing. It just wasn't working for me. He was heartbroken, but it was amicable, and I needed to move forward. And after that, I felt great. I felt happy and free, and so I started exploring who I was again as a single woman and moved to
Married, sorry.
16 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And he was a really good guy. We became, it was like became roommates. We weren't really connecting well. And it just, after a while, it was too late. And I've always been on a path of self-exploration. And I had a big spiritual awakening, and it happened quick. And it was just like, okay, I'm ready. Like, I knew I wanted to leave for a long time, but it was time, it was just like, there was no going back. It was just too late. So I lived with a friend for a while and then moved out on my own again. And then I love acting and performing, and I love LA. So I moved to LA for like a year. I decided to explore. I'm from the Detroit area, and I've never left that area. I've never lived anywhere else. So it was really exciting. I drove across the country with nothing, with only what fit in my car, only the stuff that fit in my car, and found some roommates and just enjoyed it while I was there. But it was too congested. I mean, I knew that going out there. It was expensive, congested, but I thought, well, I'll make it work. But I didn't want to make it work after a year. So I was trying to explore other places, and then decided I wanted to come back to Michigan, but not back to the Detroit area. I have a friend that lives right near here from the Detroit area. She moved here about the time I moved to LA. And so I came back, visited, and then quickly found a job and drove back across the country and settled in Portage. And that was 2023. That was like winter, like end of January, beginning of February. And at first I was ecstatic. I was happy. But then after a few months, I felt like everything hit me all at once. Like I had been moving around so much for those past 3-4 years since the divorce. When I discovered this is where I want to be, it's like I stopped and exhaled, and then everything hit me, like the grief from the divorce and all the moving around. And I just felt lonely, and I spent a lot of time isolating. And that was the spring of 2023. And so that continued on through maybe late summer. And then early fall, I was coming out of it, and I thought, maybe the missing piece is dating. Maybe it's time to, I really wasn't lonely for a romantic relationship. People think that victims of romance fraud are desperate and lonely, and that is not true. Most people are highly intelligent. In some cases, people, yeah, I think.
Oh,
not in all.
I don't consider myself lonely either.
Yeah, and I don't know that I would ever call anybody desperate. I don't like that word. I think a lot of people maybe don't know how to be with themselves and are not comfortable with who they are. And it's easy to want to wrap yourself up into somebody else, into a relationship. And again, not for everybody, but I had spent so much time working on that and not doing that and getting to know who I was. So I was hesitant. I'm like, I don't know if I want to meet somebody. I'm too set in my ways, but I'm like, okay, let's just see what happens. Just maybe I'll meet some friends or I don't know. Let's try it. So a couple of coworkers met their significant others on Tinder. So I decided to try it, and I'm especially hesitant to do online dating. But I tried it and created a profile and swiped on a few different men, but nothing ever came of it. And then this profile popped up that was really intriguing to me. It was very similar to mine, the way it was written. I talked about, I think, spirituality and self-awareness and that, because those are things that are really important to me in someone else, somebody who knows who they are, so someone's not looking to me to save them, we're both on solid ground. And I got that impression from this profile. And so I swiped right and it was a match. And I always say that, like, he had me at, it's a match. I feel like just that profile, it was almost like he had me right there. Like, it was already getting me under his spell.
Do you think that he wrote that profile
to target me?
Was it a recent profile? Did you ever find out how long you'd been on there?
He had said a few weeks or days, maybe. So I truly do believe that he saw my profile from another profile, with using a different one, and targeted me, like, specifically. I always had that feeling that he knew the type, whoever that scammer was. It's like he knew all the right things to say. They talked about spirituality, and like, I couldn't believe that anyone could fake that. I can usually see through that, That's hard to, like, I can usually
know people.
Yeah, I know, especially online. So when I reached out right away and told him I really loved his profile, and he reached out, I think probably within a half hour, and we started chatting. It was very casual, very laid back. It was every day from the start. But it moved slow, but it moved quick. It was, I went back a lot in the beginning after the scam ended. I'm like, what got me so quickly? Because he wasn't saying I love you right off the bat.
Right.
It was the give and take of the conversation. It was so natural, and he always focused on me. And it was like he would ask a question, and he would always compliment my answer or say how nice that was. He goes, "Oh, that's lovely. That you do that," and it was just so refreshing. And so I remember a weekend thinking, I'm falling for this guy already. I just couldn't believe how fast that I was starting to feel those feelings. But I thought I was 52 at the time, and I thought, I know what I was looking for. And of course, they know how to mirror that. So, and that's what he was doing. He was mirroring exactly what I wanted, who I was. And so it made it really easy to fall in love.
Don't you think that we're mature enough that we think, if somebody aligns with what we're thinking, why pretend that we're not attracted? Why not?
Yeah.
And just kind of see what happens.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, my 20s and 30s, I didn't know much about, that much what I wanted. But like at that point, after being married and divorced, I knew what I wanted. And it was a week and a half, and he said he was falling for me first. And I said the same thing back. And so I asked about meeting. I'm like, we're falling in love. We haven't even met yet. And so we were going to meet that second weekend. He said he was from Fort Wayne, which is 2 hours from me. So we were going to meet halfway at a coffee shop. But he said he might have to go to San Diego on business. And yeah, and which didn't sting, now it's like, of course, but at the time,
hindsight, right?
Yeah, he just said he was a freelance project manager for a construction company, and that seemed legitimate. There was a project that he suspected was getting behind, so he's like, I may have to go for a week or two. So it's like they wait long enough to do that to where you're falling, to where you think, well, they're going out of town. Call me when you get back. Sorry, no can do, but. I was like, okay, that's not a big deal. So then that weekend he flew to San Diego, and I talked about having a video call, and he suggested doing it via Skype. So that Sunday he called me, and it was a AI deep fake, obviously, but it was his face, this face that was the same as the pictures that he had sent me.
Yeah.
And then he said he couldn't hear me though. And I kept like, what's going on with my volume or my sound? And I was kind of frantic. Oh my God. And then he hung up after like 30 seconds. And then he said he had to go to a meeting. So how convenient. And I left. That was the last video call.
Oh.
that we tried. Yeah, he wouldn't. He kept making excuses. Later that night, I said, well, why don't we try again? And then he said that he had a bad day at the construction site. He had to fire all the employees and the manager, the site manager, and he was just like frazzled, and he was just going to go home and go back to his room and go to bed. And then he actually said, in fact, I don't know if I can focus on a relationship right now. If you want to find someone else, I understand. And I'm like, what? We just said we were falling for each other. You just told me this morning you were going to break my heart. And so he pulled this 180, and it was a tactic to pull away, obviously. Yeah. And he said he didn't want to lose touch, and he still wanted to be friends or whatever, but he just couldn't focus. He had to focus on the contract right now. So I was like, what? Actually, I literally that night went back on Tinder and swiped and matched with a few more men, because I wanted to be like, okay, I'm a little disappointed, a lot disappointed, but I'm going to keep moving forward, because that, usually when men have said that before, oh, let's be friends, and then you never hear from them again. So that's what I expected. So the next morning he reached out. It's just to say good morning. And I said, and then I was mad. I'm like, you know what? I can't talk right now. I was busy. I said, I'll message you later. So then that night I messaged him and said, I'm upset. I said, I need like a couple days. I need some space. And he said, well, can we still like text, or no texting, or just no talking? And I said, neither. And so he gave me this sad little emoji. And he goes, well, can I just call you? Just let me explain, and then you can have all the space you want. So I'm like, okay. So he calls, and he said, he started saying that he still wanted me. And I'm like, I'm confused now. You pulled away, and now you still want me? He goes, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I just got overwhelmed with my emotions. And he started crying. And so I remember feeling touched, but I do remember having my guard up, because I'm like, well, are you going to break up every time you have a bad day at work? And he goes, no, this is a one-time thing. I think the thing that he said that really pulled me in was that he knew that I was the woman for him in this lifetime. That was like a big, huge hook. And so I said, okay, then I had planned on taking my couple days of space. And then the next day I just remember feeling like, oh my God, all these emotions, these romantic feelings, and I didn't want space anymore. So I reached out to him, and there were actually, if I could go back a little, there was a couple things that I did a reverse image search, or not a reverse image search. I was going to do a background check, and I searched him via Google. Like, that was a few days before, when he went to, the day he left San Diego.
Okay.
And I couldn't find him, and I panicked. And I remember feeling all of a sudden something is really, really wrong. And it was like, all of a sudden I had this clarity. And then later on, I didn't want it to be wrong. And then that night, all these romantic feelings, just a wave of them washed over me. We hadn't even talked from that time frame that I had that like feeling that something was wrong. It's not even like he said, hey, I'm thinking about you. It was just, I don't know, I was too far gone, at that point. And so, And
then he pulled that tactic on you, I noticed, where they pull away and then they come back.
Yes.
Yes.
That
one too, right?
Yeah. Yep, exactly. And he did that several times. And because it gets you more and more hooked in, and creates the obsessive feelings or thoughts and feelings.
They do it because it works.
Yeah.
They just want them more.
Yeah. They know exactly what to do and how it works. And yeah. And it's infuriating. So then after I reached out, that it was a Monday that after he broke up, we got back together, and we just continued talking. And by the middle of that week, I said I had completely fallen in love with him, and he said the same thing. And I asked him, well, how long are you gonna have to be in San Diego now? And he goes, I'm not sure. I have to oversee that. We have to hire these people. I have to oversee this project. And I'm like, okay, well, we'll just see what happens, And so we just continued to, we talked like twice a day, and just texted throughout the day. And I remember there were times if he didn't call within a certain time, like it might only be a few hours, I would just freak out. I was just so, oh my God. And I'm like, I mean, I used to do that anyway because I was always afraid the other person was losing interest, so that wasn't nothing, wasn't anything new to me. It was just an old pattern. And I'm like, why is this coming back? I'm like, well, we haven't met, so maybe that's why. So I thought it was me, but it was them. They get you on this pattern of, they call you a certain day, time of day, certain time of night. They deviate from that pattern, and it just creates a whole, like, the emotions, and it really is a biological response in your brain.
Yep.
Chemistry, which a lot of people don't understand. That they know how to take the chemicals and make them hyperactive, and it creates a whole, that's why the rational thinking goes out the window. And it seems rational at the time, but looking back, you're like, none of that makes sense.
None of that is rational. The whole relationship is not rational.
I know. That's why I laugh sometimes when I talk about it, because I realize how, and it's not laughing at myself, but it is, but not in a bad way.
Well, it's either
I have to laugh at it
or cry. One of the
yeah. I don't want to cry, so I'm gonna laugh about it. So yeah. So okay, so this is going on through we're talking like in early mid-November. About mid-November is when we started talking about he was going to move here, and we were going to get a house together. And I was looking up listings and sending him listings and pictures of houses. I even went to a house and took a picture of it and sent it to him. And we talked about getting married. I was sending him pictures of engagement rings, and it was just all so real at the time. And it just was so exciting. And sometimes I still miss that feeling. It's a tough one. So this was happening in mid-November, and I think the plan, I was set to go to LA in like December 8th to go see a friend of mine that lives back in Michigan now, who moved to LA as well for a while. And we had planned to meet December, because he was in San Diego, we were going to meet up like in LA and spend some time together, fly back here. So that would have been mid-December. So there was this new plan in motion for him to come back. And so this was still mid-November, he tells me that he was telling me that he completed a project in Qatar in the Middle East 2 years ago. And he never got paid for it because COVID hit and they had to get out quickly. So he had been trying to reach out to them for the last year to get for the payment. And they finally got back to him. And so they had this meeting on how to get this payment. And he ended up having to go to Qatar to get this payment. And so I'm like, I said, is this going to delay your return? And he said, no, I will be back December 14th. There was still that plan but he was going to come back here a day early and pick me up from the airport from LA. And I'm like, okay. So it wasn't like a ton of delays in the beginning. So it wasn't nothing was a red flag really at the time, but there wasn't this constant delay. And this is about where money started coming in. And this is a month and a half in. There was never any kind of like money involvement. Like he waited a long time. And
you met him when? And he started asking for money when?
October 16th we met. We swiped. We matched.
And it was early in the year. Okay, sorry. So
yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah, that was after the summer when I came out of, when I was isolating, and then the fall, and then it was October 16th of 2023. And so we're into he goes over to Qatar, and it was Thanksgiving week, basically. So it was towards the end of November, and he had to hire he had to have this meeting with the board. And so he had to hire a lawyer to help with the documentation and a translator because it's the Middle East. And so he was actually sending me receipts for payments to this. He's like, I found a lawyer. And he was being like, people asked, didn't you think that was a red flag that he was sending those? I'm like, no, I thought he was my partner and he was being transparent. We're like a team here. And so he was just sharing information that you would with your partner. And so I was actually touched by it. It just made me trust him even more. And then, so he tells me one day his bank account, he can't get in, he can't log in. And he asked me to try and if I could do it for him to make this transfer to pay the translator. And I said, yeah, sure, I'd love to. Or no, this was a payment to the lawyer. And so he walked me through it. He gave me his login, his password. I saw this bank account that looked pretty legitimate. They had like $700,000, $800,000 in it. And I made this transfer. It was successful. I saved the receipt, sent it to him. And so it was like, at that point, I felt like, oh my God, like he really trusts me. I felt like we are a team. Every time, either if we worked through a conflict or something like that, helping him transfer money, I felt like I would tell him this. I just fell deeper in love with you. And that's why they do that. They know that it makes you more attached. And that's exactly what it did. So the next,
flag.
Huh?
Another red flag.
Another red flag.
That we didn't know about until too late.
I didn't know this type of scam was happening.
Yeah.
This type of fraud was going on at all. So the next day, he still can't get in, and he asked me to try again, and I couldn't get in. And there was an error message that it was due to suspicious activity. So he was panicked, and he's like, I have to go. I have to find out. I have to talk to my account manager with the bank and see what's going on. So at the end of the day, I hear back, and he's like, there's nothing I can do. I would have to go in person for a facial verification, which is this branch he said he'd have to go into is in England. And this meeting he's supposed to have is like in 2 days. And he said, I have to raise the money. He never came out and said, do you have the money? He said, I have to raise it. And I remember thinking, if he asked me, I'm going to feel really uncomfortable, but he didn't. So I said, I would go to my financial advisor, but I can't get money out in 2 days. It takes like 7 to 10 days. And he even discouraged me in a way. He's like, hold on, just wait a minute, slow down. I asked a friend, I'm waiting to hear back from my friend. He should be able to help me. And I'm like, okay. And so the next day he hadn't heard back still, or no, this was 2 days later. He was like, yeah, he was supposed to have that meeting and he was disappointed. It wasn't happening. And I'm like, I'm at work and I'm like, I've got to do something. What can I do? I can't, he's worked so hard. I have to help. And I remember feeling that determination to help him. So I thought, well, wait a minute, maybe I can take out some loans. So I went to my bank and they said it's just to ask about it. And they said, well, it's usually immediate approval if you're approved. And this was a Friday. And so I messaged him and I told him, I want to take some loans out and help you. And I said, let me do this for you. Let me help you. If your friend comes through, I'll just pay him off. And he calls me that night crying, telling me no one's ever loved him like this before. He's crocodile to laugh. No, I get some guy laugh too, because it's like these crocodile tears. You get it. That's why you're laughing. And it's, yeah. So the next day I went and got but the translator payment from what I saw when I tried to log in was $26,000. No, $21,000. It was $21,000. So I got a loan out for $15,000 and then a $5,000 cash advance and a credit card. And I said, well, how do I get this to you? And he said, well, the best way and the quickest way is Bitcoin ATM. Of course. See, I'm laughing because it's so typical now. And so I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, wait, this has to be done through cash. And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, oh my God, I was so nervous. So he's like, take out $15,000 in cash right now and to start. And then, no, 12,000. So I went to, it was over the course of 4 or 5 days that I went to different Bitcoin ATMs and just shoving money into them. And it just like, I remember having a little bit of a feeling like, what am I doing? What did I just do? But it wasn't strong. And it was like, now I look back, it's that like, and I'm like, God, in the past, that would have freaked me out. If I gave my friend that kind of money, I'd be freaking out. But it just was so that whatever feeling or red flag, it's like it was really dull. It was just like a kind of like, oh yeah, well, that's all right. kind of thing.
Doing, you're not thinking, and
Yeah,
or your thinking is suppressed because you're doing what he wants you to do.
exactly. And I'm thinking this is the love of my life and we're going to get married and he's going to, in this payout that is supposed to, and it's like $10.1 million for this project. So $5 million would be ours after he paid the contractors. So the other, I still needed more money because the Bitcoin ATM fees are pretty high. So I just thought I'll just get like a $5,000. He didn't even ask. I'm like, you're going to need more money for this. How are you going to get him the full amount? I'm just like, here's more money. Yeah. Yeah. He's probably like, this is too easy.
Yeah.
So, that was, let's see, I gave him the last, this was like December, I think 2nd was when I got the loans out and I finished the last transfer like the 6th of December. And then he had his meeting the Friday I left for LA and he said it was a success. And then he said, I'll have a meeting with the financier the following Monday to find out how to go about getting this payout. And I'm like, okay. So I was just really excited for Monday to come. And at this point, okay, I'm in LA and we're supposed to meet that week. So I was like high as a kite. I was so excited. And that Monday comes and he messaged me and he said it was a success. And he said, but there was an agreement that he needs to do an inspection on the property. And I'm like, that's when I knew another delay. I'm like, you're not going to make it back, are you? He goes, I'm going to try, but I don't know how long it's going to take. I'm like, oh, God, I was so disappointed. And I try not to show too much disappointment because, like, in my mind, to him, this was all a big success. He was going to get this money. And so I wanted to be happy for him and for us. So I thought.
Yeah.
And so I came back from LA that Friday and man, I asked if he had wanted to, like, I was going to park my car like at a hotel and I'd take a shuttle to the airport. And then I said, well, do you want to like just pick me up from the airport? He goes, yeah, I can pick you up. He knew the whole time. So I had to take an Uber home and I live an hour from the airport. And I'm like, yeah, I'm like,
That was a couple of pennies there.
maybe more upset almost than the rest of the money. I'm like, you could have at least spared me that.
Yeah.
Dude. You didn't care though. They don't care.
Yeah.
Okay, so I get back and then he said, maybe you can handle the payout while I handle the inspection. And I'm like, okay, well, what do I need to do? He's like, I will send you a link to a crypto. Well, first he asked, should we do this crypto or should we do it via bank check? And like asking me, like, my opinion matters. And he said, bank check takes longer. There's higher fees. I'm like, okay, well, then let's do crypto. And so he said, I'll send you the website and just get create an account. And then we'll send an email to customer service. So I did all that. He creates this email that I sent to customer service. And then they assigned me an account manager and said to reach out to him through WhatsApp. And not a red flag at the time, big red flag now. And so I'm like, okay, I think he told me what to say to the account manager to message. And then this account manager reached out to me, I don't know, with the same day. And so he said, well, okay, we just need to verify you have an account. And I had to fill out a beneficiary form because I was doing this next of kin to get this payout. And then I had to send it to him along with my driver's license. And he said, okay, everything looks good. The money should show up in the account within 24 to 48 hours. And at this point, this is mid-December to when the money showed up, it was December 22nd. And so I checked and it was there. And so I'm like, okay, well, how do I convert this to cash and transfer it to my account? It's in a crypto account. He goes, well, I'll walk you through that. And he goes, the first thing he said was, there's a $50,000 activation fee. I'm like, what? Huh? I'm like, that's really weird. I knew something was up now, but I still wasn't thinking scam. Not on the Richard was the name that my scammer used. And so I didn't think he was scamming me. I wondered if this company was trying to pull the wool over his eyes or scamming him, so I'm like, why didn't this company tell you about this fee? You said the bank fees were high. This is pretty hefty.
Yeah, no, yeah. The bank fee's not going to be that high.
Like, right. So I said, well, can't you take it out of the payout? He's like, no, it has to be up front, but it's a bond payment, so you'll get it back. I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. So I'm texting this account manager, texting back with the scammer, and they're both scammers, and I bet you they're sitting next to each other is what I'm thinking. Or it's the same person, but probably, yeah. Yeah, I'll never know. So I was very hesitant, but I said, I can reach out to my financial advisor. I have the money in my retirement. And he's like, yeah, why don't you do that? And so I put a call into him, and I was hesitant because I remember thinking 26,000, if something goes wrong, I remember asking myself, could I live with that much money being gone? And the answer was yes, because I knew I did it for love. And if it all went wrong, I still didn't think of it as a scam. I just thought if he took off with my money, which I guess in essence wouldn't be a scam, I said I wouldn't care about the money because I'd be so heartbroken. So, but another 50,000 would almost wipe me out. And so I got on the phone with my financial advisor, and he said, what's going on? And something told me all of a sudden to tell him the whole story. Like, I have a really good professional relationship with him. So I tell him everything that's happened, because I told him first thing, I'm like, I'm engaged. And he's like, okay. It was kind of out of left field for him. And so he said, Beth, I hate to be the one to tell you this. I think you're in a romance scam. And I'm like, what? No. I remember thinking, we're in love. He kept saying it's classic romance fraud, and I couldn't understand how, because he never asked for the money. And my heart was so in, I couldn't even see that. And him and his team are trained in romance fraud. And I remember saying, I am so embarrassed. And he said, don't be embarrassed. He said, you'd be surprised at how much this is happening. And he kept me on the phone for an hour, and he had to call in the fraud department, and because I think they were trying to stop me from taking out the money. And he sent me articles, but he kept trying to find out, like, I need you to be like 60% sure. Maybe because I think they froze my account. They can't ultimately tell me what to do with my money. I said, I don't know. You need to give me time to wrap my head around this. And so I got off the phone, and the scammer's literally messaging me as I'm getting off the phone. And I'm like, I'm here. Hold on. And so I said to my financial advisor, I don't know how to cut this off right now. I still love him. I need to be sure. I need time to wrap my head around this. And so he's like, okay, well, tell him I'm on vacation for a couple weeks, and you can't get the money until you sign a funds release form, and you can't do that unless I'm there. And he's like, that'll buy you some time. And I'm like, okay, I'll do that. And so I got off the phone, and I'm like, okay, I got to talk to this. Now I have it because I have to play him along now. And so I got on the phone, and I'm like, it was weird because it was just like, now I'm seeing him with different eyes. And so I told him that what my financial advisor said, and I kept him going. I was still sending love poems and just playing along. And I guess it wasn't hard because I still really felt that, I felt those feelings still. And yeah. And so a week later, I decided, I think it's time to cut him off, because it's getting hard. I just need to move forward. And by this point, like, my family knew, my friends knew, they were all supportive. And I was with my family. It was,
they knew that you were in a relationship, or they knew you were in a scam?
They knew. I told them I was in a scam. They all knew that I had met somebody online, but so I find this out 3 days before Christmas, by the way. And so I spent Christmas night. I was watching my friend's dogs for a couple weeks, but I had Christmas night off and I had to get out of here. I just got a hotel room. I went back to the Detroit area and I watched The Tinder Swindler. That was my Christmas night on 2023. I read the article. I'm like, I was like desperate for information. I wanted to learn about this. I wanted to like really know. I was really trying to like educate myself to try to believe it. And then I met with my aunt the next day and she was really understanding and kind of like, this is not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. And it was great to hear that in the beginning. And so then December 30th, normally they have Christmas, but they were out of the country. So they had it on December 30th. So I drove back to the Detroit area and they are like, why don't you cut him off here with the support of your family? I'm like, that's probably a good idea. And they thought I should just block him. I'm like, no, he has to know that I know. So my cousin wrote this short 5-line poem, basically telling him to F off. And so I sent it to him. And it was, if you would like, I can recite.
I would love to hear it.
And she wrote it pretty quick. I was impressed. So she said, okay, she smiled and said that it's over. Your romance scam, it can't control her. So I'm blocking your number. Fuck right on off, sir. I won't be your hapless cash donor.
That's great.
And then I sent it and then I blocked him. And then later I'm like crying and I'm like, what if he's real? And I broke his heart because I still wanted to believe. And so my cousin, she was like, you didn't just know that this does not mean that you're not lovable. And so the next day though, I was devastated. I'm like, I had to check my spam. So I did. And there was an email and it was something like, how I couldn't believe it until I read your message. How could you ever think this of me? And what got into you? And he always used my fear against me and made me think it was my fear was the problem. And then he would exacerbate the fear. And then he would make me think he was the one helping me heal it. It was fucked up how he could do that. Yeah. So he said, I'll just keep loving you until the specks in your mind clear. And, I laugh about that now, but that was the line that got me. It was like, it sounds really sappy and cheesy now, but
yeah,
I just was like, oh my God, I'm like, I am not going to send more money, but I have to go back and I have to know for sure. I have to play this out. And I told my friend too. I didn't tell my family, but one of my friends knew. So like, keep me accountable. So I go back and I'm like, I think I still knew something was wrong, that he was a scammer, but I also really felt like I broke his heart. I really felt like I misjudged him and in my heart, and I felt horrible. And so he would tell me, I love you. I can't stop loving you, even though you doubt me. And I'm just, what did he say? Something like, I forgive you. I can't stay mad at you, but you broke me. Don't ever hurt me again. He would go back and forth. And at this point I think I was out of it enough to see the manipulation because I could feel it in my body. It was toxic. And then the last conversation we had, he said, what if I had taken my own life? This was like, I'd only gone back for 2 days. And I remember thinking after like the next day, I'm like, realer, I don't want to be with someone who's threatening suicide like it's my fault. I don't want to be in that kind of a relationship anyway. So it doesn't matter if he's real or not. So I sent him another message and, one of my coworkers knew too. So she helped me draft this email to him and basically like listing all the reasons why you are a scammer and all the proof. And he just came back and said, I think you're overreacting. Nothing I say or do is going to matter until I'm home. And the lie is the fear in your mind and everything it's creating. And he said something like, you're going to get sick mentally and emotionally if you keep believing this. And I'm like, that made it worse. I'm like, you just did a 180 from this heartbreak routine. And now, so he was like every last ditch effort to get me back in. And I said, I don't trust you. I don't believe you. And I don't want to talk to you, but you know where I live. Bring me my money and maybe we'll talk. And then never heard from him again. That is the whole story.
And so from start to finish, so it was from like October until December?
January 3rd was January 4th was my last message, but when I officially said this is done and I'm not going back, it was January 3rd. So it was 2.5 months. It felt like 2.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, as you're telling your story, our stories parallel each other.
Yeah. I believe it.
Different options that, he chose versus what my scammer chose. But same thing.
Yeah.
It all goes towards money and how.
Yes. Yeah. The manipulation tactics are all the same. The lines, the poems, it's all the same. Yeah.
Did you keep did he love bomb you?
Yes.
Did you
very much? Yeah, it's all in my book. I wrote it and published all my text messages.
Yes, and I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
What you did afterwards. And was this like catharsis for you, or you just wanted to get the message out there, or
both? Yeah, So even the week that I knew, before I cut him off, I remember thinking, I don't know how you navigate something like this. I've navigated a lot of loss in my life, and I know the grief process, and I know it, and I go through it. I don't deny my feelings, but I don't know how to navigate this. So I just remember saying, I'm not going to let it destroy me. I'm going to dig it. I'm going to dive into my life and live it to the fullest, do the things that I normally say I'm going to do, but I don't do. I love improv. And so I got very involved in our community improv theater, and I was already taking classes, but I started going to shows all the time and met some incredible people. And it didn't take long before I was devastated. I mean, I remember crying many nights on the couch. And yeah, at the same time, my life was getting better. I just created a better life, and I started advocating and reaching out I think the first person I reached out to was Anna Rowe. And she works with Cecilia from the Tinder Swindler, because I looked her up, and then I saw Anna Rowe, and I saw that she did support groups every other Sunday. She still does those. And I started, she's in the UK, and so I started doing those. And then she mentioned Aaron West, and then I reached out to Aaron, and then Kathy Waters with Advocating Against Romance Scammers. And then April Helm was my first podcast, Scammer Stories podcast. And then they all started, I can't remember how, I think the podcast, and then I told people I'm willing to go in the media and share my story. And just that spiraled, just I got one and then another one. And then sometimes they'll I saw your story. Would you like to do this? And I'm like, sure. And then, so I knew I wanted to write a book, but I remember thinking, I don't know where to start. I don't know how to make it, unique or something that would draw people in. And then I thought, God, you know what? I could publish the text messages. So 3 months, I remember 3 months after it ended, I remember I was sitting on the floor. I was crying. I was having a bad night. And I stood up and I opened my laptop. I started typing. I'm like, okay, what do I want to do first? I have to put my story in there. I had my story already typed out for law enforcement. And I just filled in the blanks. And then I started copying and texting messages. That was not easy to do. But I did it. And it was very healing, because when I went back, even editing, and I was looking at, I could see patterns more and more. I could see there's a particular day, I'm sure there's more than one day, where I could see the actual cycle of abuse occur through a series of text messages. And it was very enlightening and very I learned a lot about how they operate. And then at some point and every time I read them, I can't help but laugh, because they're so sappy, It's I'm even oh, gross, shut up.
But when your mind is in a different space.
When you're in it. And when and it's
hits you.
It's happening day by day. When you read them all at one time, it's a little overwhelming and like, oh my God, it's all we do is profess our love for each other, you know? So yeah, the love bombing was I mean, if he wasn't telling me how wonderful I was like, is there something wrong? You know, he just constantly was telling me how wonderful and beautiful and amazing and proud of me he was. And, you know, it was
They get it. But
yeah.
who doesn't want to hear that?
Yeah.
Believe that, you know, at some point in time, you're just open, receptive to anything that comes in, you know. I mean, I had a relationship for a long time, and he knew that. So, you know, unfortunately, I was still receptive to something like that, but they just play on that, and boy, that goes fast. It's lighting a firecracker, you know?
Yeah. It's like that's the dopamine hits that they give you. And so like, and then there's the withdrawal when you're not getting it. And so, but yeah, and that's how all of that started. And it is very vindicating to put a book out there because I realized that it took a while for me to say, oh my God, I know why that feels so vindicating. It's because they silence us. They know how to isolate us.
Yeah.
And so it was like, oh, you don't get to do this to me anymore. You don't get to do this and get away with it. I mean, he may never get caught or that crime, you know, I know it was a big criminal organization, but you don't get to get away with it.
How did you find out? Didn't you say that you think your scammer was from Africa?
Yeah, Nigeria.
Find that out.
And when I told Anna Rowe my story, she studies the Yahoo boys in Nigeria. And she said it's just a classic Yahoo type scam, the format that was used. Okay. And now thinking, I have 2 recordings of him too. When I knew it was a scam before I told him, I recorded 2 conversations. And like, he said he was French. He said he was, and he didn't really have a French accent, but it wasn't, now that I think back, it was Nigerian, but it wasn't a super thick Nigerian. So it could have been a mix, you know? And so, yeah, it was definitely a Nigerian accent.
Yeah, and I didn't know what Nigerian accents sounded like, but the scammer that got me told me that he had grown up or that he was born and raised in Spain. But as I think about it, that was not a Spanish accent. But I couldn't think it either, you know? I just didn't know what it was. So that's really hard, but I guess that's a clue. If you can't recognize that accent and they're telling you they're French or they're telling you they're Spanish or whatever, you can go and listen to Spanish speakers speaking English.
You can hear,
what that sounds like. And the more investigation you can do, the better. I think, tell me what you learned. Tell me what's important for people to know who are experiencing the same phenomenon.
I think the biggest thing is it's not your fault. The biggest thing I advocate for is language too, how money is stolen and not lost. And we don't fall for scams. That's a huge thing. We're targeted and manipulated. And I think it's the difference between blaming victims and holding the criminals accountable. That's a big thing for me. That's why I want to educate victims on that so they stop blaming themselves, and the public stop blaming us, you know? And help law enforcement understand. So
that's, I think education is probably the biggest, maybe only thing that we can do. Is just make it known enough that it becomes like the Nigerian prince scam.
Exactly.
That he knows and kind of laughs off now at this point. Boy, they have changed their tune. They have,
I know,
fine-tuned their skills, let me tell you.
Yeah, and it's hard. Once somebody's all in, it's very hard to convince them that it's a scam. I feel fortunate that I listened to my financial advisor. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I trust him implicitly. I think the reason I told him what was going on is because we have such a great professional relationship. I just couldn't lie to him. You know, I realized that later on. And first time I saw him after, he's from the Detroit area, that's where he's at now. I'm like, can I give you a hug? He's like, So
Yeah.
he buys my books, and he gives them, like, if he talks to somebody, if he happens to be talking to somebody about romance fraud or whatever, he will give them one of my books. So
Wow.
that's kind of cool. Yeah.
Great. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I wish you all the success in the world with that. Thank you so much. I hope you learned some valuable information from this episode. Please join us next time on Romance Scam Rebellion.